So I'm delighted today to welcome Sophia Meeres. She's from the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy. She is a landscape architect. She's been doing a lot of work over the last few years on trees with local authorities, and she's here to give some insights into that, focusing on Ireland's trees and woodlands outside the forest. So I will hand over to her and we'll talk a few questions and answers afterwards, and give a little more information about some forthcoming events. But I'll hand over to Sophia now, and she'll give a nice presentation.
Do I need this?
Actually, you don't, sorry.
Okay, great. Hello, thank you. Hi, colleagues. Thank you so much for coming to this talk and for being interested in trees and wanting to talk about trees. And some of you I don't know, so some of you are meeting for the first time, but really this isn't an expert talk about everything I've learned to know about trees and forests and planning. It's actually a shout out to other disciplines in the school, across the schools, across the disciplines in the university, to say, I think there's really something that we need to do. So hopefully this is just the start of a longer conversation. So I'll start by saying I'm a landscape architect and an engineer, but after 15 years of practice, I came to UCD, where I focus on understanding landscapes, and that's what I teach. For 15 years, I worked in the UK, Ireland, and France in planning landscapes and designing landscapes. So planning and design and quite large scale vision of the countryside. So between 2013 and 2020, I worked with landscape master students in Arklow. So we were persistently in place in Arklow. And in 2020, Wicklow County Council invited me, or us, including the Landscape Studio, to look at Wicklow County Council's tree management plan for the county. Now, we developed this under COVID conditions. We bid for the work, by the way, with UCD Consult. Thank you, UCD Consult. And we took a sort of bottom-up approach to this tree policy plan. We had a great collaboration with Wicklow Public Participation Network, who are super on point, and put together a great county-wide survey and came up with what we took to be a very ambitious brief. Now, as anybody that's worked on county tree development plans, you can start with lots of ambition, but then sometimes it all gets watered down at the end. And I have to say that's what happened in the end with Wicklow. But in 2022, my team tendered for 4 more tree management strategies. This time in the Midland counties, we tendered through the EU tendering system, again via UCD Consult. And last year, we again won another contract that we tendered for to assist Mayo with their county strategy. So these 5 projects are ongoing at the moment. Tree management policies are long and slow things to elaborate and establish and describe. But what I can say, that the policy work I've been doing over the last few years has really deepened my understanding of trees in Ireland and some of the conundrums and struggles that come with trying to plan for trees in Ireland. And so today, rather than talk about the policies, which are all still in draft form, I'm going to sort of raise some issues and questions about Ireland's current and future treescape. So there's always a problem with language when we're talking about trees. So I'm using this word treescape now as a way to overcome this question of the urban and rural divide. I've pressed the button. Right. Okay, thank you, thanks. Oh yeah, so here I just wanted to show you some of the graphics that go with our draft documents. I can't talk about them. They're all in, the local authorities are considering how best to implement them, what can they take from them, what can they commit to, and how can they overcome the differences perhaps with the county development plan and now the tree management strategy and the problem of a policy which might be more ambitious than a county development plan. So everything has to roll together. So the one thing I'm going to say about the tree policies really is, as everyone knows, it's all about canopy. So canopy matters, size matters. And well, the thing we're trying to do in our urban environments is to move from these lollipop trees, the reductions of these trees, to big canopy trees. So the sort of strap line, one of many, is, you know, the bigger the better. We need big, beautiful, long-lived, large-growing trees in our urban environments, but we also need them in our rural environments. So yes, we've gone back on to the next one. In my invitation to this talk, which is, you know, how we might start planning for a tree resource that traverses the rural-urban divide, I thought afterwards about the language, and I thought, maybe I shouldn't have said tree resource. Maybe I should have said trees, woodlands, forests, trees on farms, hedgerows that traverse the rural-urban divide. But then this notion of rural and urban divide is also very simplistic, because it implies a simple dichotomy. And in fact, it's not a division between two simple situations, but it's the topic of trees and their history and all the different situations and conditions in which they grow across Ireland is much, much, much more complex than simply urban and rural. And it's this complex mixture that makes up the country's treescape. So I'm starting to use this word treescape rather than talking about trees or forests or woodlands, because this language is actually quite confusing for everybody. What's the difference between a forest and a woodland? And is that tree part of the forest or not? So actually, one of the things we've done is categorize the different sorts of situations, or try to, that we might find trees in urban or rural situations. And there might be a couple of dozen different categories or typologies, but like the most simple and easy one might be to say, yeah, we have an urban forest. We have trees on farms, which are freestanding trees, alignments of trees, hedgerow trees, small groups and woodlands, many of them tiny fragments that are not managed commercially. We have trees and domains, so there's Castle and Strokestown and Charlesville and Westport, many others. Some remain in private ownership, others not. Many contain known collections of important trees. Elsewhere, there are fragments of ancient and long-established woodlands that may or may not be protected, that may or may not be on private land. We also have amenity woodlands, sometimes owned by Quiltshire or local authorities, again managed for leisure and amenity rather than for nature. And we have a number of national woodland reserves, obviously, all of them protected, but often really tiny, and again managed for nature. And then the commercial forests, so managed for timber, some of them state-owned, some of them owned by small farmers, some of them owned by big business. Yes. So that's just a sketch through the sort of all the categories of trees that we have. But so when my first question is, when it comes to national and local ambitions for trees outside the forest, that was one of the invitations that I wrote to you all. It's like, you know, what I'm going to be talking about are national and local ambitions for trees outside the forest. The answer is a short one, because there are none. There are no clear ones. There is nothing that you can measure outside forestry. So we can say there is no vision of or for Ireland's trees outside the forest. And as I was just saying with Brian, we have our forest cover statistic measurements, but forestry is a land use. It doesn't measure trees. It doesn't talk about canopy. It measures land area. So our land, when we talk about forest statistics, we're talking about areas of land that are designated for forest. But when you compare the different databases, like the Corrine with the forest inventory, now with the National Land Cover Map, or with the National Tree Map that I get from Blue Sky, we see these very different statistics coming out. So a lot of the work I've been doing is checking on those. Actually, yes, I just want to show you some of these maps, because here on the right-hand side in the red and green, we have the forest inventory for the county of Roscommon, and the red is private forest, the green is Quiltshire forest, public forest. We have a forest cover of 12%. That means 12% of the land in Roscommon is designated as forest. But when we float on top of this, the National Tree Map, which is on the left-hand side, we have a whole different picture of what we've actually got. And the National Tree Map is a private resource. There's a small company called Blue Sky that has overflown the whole of the UK, much of France, all of Ireland. I say at this point, I do not know why the Irish government has not bought the national tree map for the whole country and made it available to every single local authority, every single university, and anybody that's interested in talking about trees and discovering trees. As it is, we have to persuade each of the local authorities to buy their own map, and these are expensive. So the government could buy the map. They could require a flyover every year, every 2 years, every summer. We could follow all sorts of information. It seems quite strange to me that there are so many researchers looking at ways to remotely detect the trees that we've got when there are already private companies are doing that brilliantly. So I want to know what we've got rather than spend my time trying to understand how we might find another way of getting there. So I'm all for this tree map. Back to the National Forest Strategy. As I said, there's no strategy for trees outside the forest. There's no systematic record of Ireland's trees, woodlands, or hedgerows outside the forest. And so we don't even have a baseline to start with. Maybe I'm going to, so yeah, well, okay. So I just want to say, we'll talk about that in a minute later, but I'll show you later. But what does it mean if we don't have a baseline? It means all those big, beautiful trees in hedgerows, in farmlands, in towns, in parks and gardens, in towns and cities, on village greens, those tiny woodlands, those fragments of ancient forest in hedgerows, some of them medieval hedgerows, some of them heritage trees, some of them veteran trees. We know little about the trees themselves. We know very, very little about the resource as a whole, and even less about what is going to become of it. So actually, just before we go on to the next thing, I wanted to show you, here we have Mayo. So I like looking at my counties in terms of trees. Here we have Mayo described by the forest data. So this is the land in Mayo that's designated as forest. If we float the national land cover map data on top, we've got coniferous, deciduous and mixed woodland. I've taken out the forest land, but we get a very different picture coming in. We add in then scrub and hedgerows and tiny fragments of woodland that exist. And suddenly we can see there's trees everywhere in Ireland. And when I float on top, you can't see that, it's not very clear, I'm sorry. The green map, which is the national land cover map, we start to get a very, very intricate picture of where things are. But this just leads us on to a whole lot of extra work, because we know where there's a tree, we know it's a tree over 3 meters, we know what the canopy is, we know what the height is. We don't know anything about its species, its age, or its condition. So actually having this map just reminds us all the other things that we don't yet know and that we need to find out. And I just want, I like showing you what I do. So here, zooming in, it's all very well looking at the scale of the county, but we also look at the scale of each individual tree, the site, the plot. And so here's a little GIS map. It's a national land cover map, which has actually got quite a low resolution. And here we have, here we are in Kilmaine and Claremorris, broadleaf, woodland, scrub and forest in pink. Don't ask me why I chose pink, and coniferous forest in dark green. So we have these tiny patches of coniferous forest here and quite a bit of broadleaf, woodland and scrub. But when we add in the hedgerows from the National Land Cover map, we start to get a much more intricate vision. But then when we add in the trees from the National Tree Map, we start to really see where things are missing. And actually on this map just there, I've got no buildings. We've got roads and trees. So that's all we're looking at. That's all we're interested in. We can also do this at an urban scale. So I'm just showing the kinds of things that we can do. Here we have Westport. And again, I'm overlaying the National Land Cover map. So we've got mixed forest, coniferous forest, and deciduous woodland and scrub and hedgerows. And I float in green this time, the National Tree Map. So we can start counting canopy within the urban areas. But better than that, though I haven't done it yet, and it's the next stage. It's not part of a policy, but it's part of the project. So you can zoom right in. You can zoom into Westport House or one of these other domains, or a residential housing estate that's been planted with 3 trees, all of them broomsticks. And you can start to see where have we got a just and equitable canopy cover and where don't we have it. So this has been used all across UK as well and in the States to identify social inequality as much as any other thing. And here is back to this tree policy. So we can now draw existing trees on all our local area plans and maps. And we're saying to the local planning authorities, draw the trees on every single one of the maps that you can, because trees are never drawn on maps. We never know where they are. So back to this question of planning. What have we got? What do we want? We're starting to get to know a little bit more about what we might have. We still don't know what we want. And there's this question of planning for a tree resource that traverses urban and rural categories. Earlier on, I read out rather quickly a list of about 8 different categories. And somebody here earlier said, you're going to be talking about agroforestry. That's one of the categories within our categories. And we don't know what's going to happen. So we have a national national forest strategy, but we're not sure what that's going to bring us. The advisors seem to be saying that it may be that this doesn't quite work. But my question is less about the forests and more about the trees. So back to planning this resource. We're dealing with a living resource. It's aging, it's growing, it's recycling. Ireland's treescape is rapidly changing. It's always rapidly changed, and maybe we never planned what it would become. But now we're at a point where we can start perhaps planning what happens next. So our treescape is rapidly changing, some of it by design, some of it beyond our control. But actually my question is, who, if anyone, is thinking about what's going to happen to Ireland's treescape in the future? Should we be thinking about that? How are we going to connect all of Ireland's trees in a way that connects all these various land use categories? So when we talk about these divides, they're all trees on different types of land. So we could have a tree strategy for forests and a tree strategy for hedgerows and a tree strategy for urban trees and a tree strategy for farm trees. We could have a ton of different strategies, but they're all about trees. So I'm thinking, why don't we try to think about the tree resource as a single resource and a holistic resource, and think about it as a single strategy. So we have a strategy that connects our sustainably managed forests with our hedgerows, our tiny trees, and our urban trees. And we can start thinking about a network, an interconnected network of ecologically valuable habitats that traverse the countryside and connect all of these categories. Now, the question is, who is thinking about this future? And as far as I know, it's not Teagasc, it's not the Forest Service, it's certainly not the local authorities. So who's planning, amongst other things, who's planning our ancient and long-established woodlands of the future? So I'm going to propose, what I want to propose here is that trees as a topic deserve to be, they deserve all the attention of the UCD Earth Institute. And actually, I think trees deserve to be at the heart of a strategic priority. So that's one thing I think we should be looking at. Trees, in fact, cut across every single one of the 8 themes of the Earth Institute without being the focus of any one of them. So this question, what do we need to do to connect trees, woodlands and hedges across the divides? How do we bring trees into our farms and across our countryside and into our towns, and think of it as a single holistic resource? How do we establish the networks that we need for leisure and amenity close to the places that we live? How do we allow our urban populations access to trees and woodlands, which they may not have currently? What about our networks to enrich biodiversity? How do we create a truly sustainable tree resource, and what's stopping us? So I'm just going to go through just to my final slide here, inspired by some of the things that have been going on in the UK, this notion of plan-led approach to forest planning. So the Forest of Avon, and there's also the Great Northern Forest, they're connecting all the tiny dots of ancient woodland, native woodland, old woodland, and they're sweeping across those 4 counties in the west of England to say, in the future, this is the forest that we want to have. And it might not just be forest, it might be forest that passes through towns and villages and across motorways, etc., etc. They're not bothered about that, but it's the idea of connecting things. And actually, the other thing which I thought was very interesting, there was a tree scoping exercise done recently in Great Britain. So it's a horizon scanning about the future of UK's forests. But it occurred to me that we could do a horizon scanning for the future of Ireland's treescape. And that might be 20 years, 50 years, 150 years, but we'd be looking at the long-term future of Ireland's trees across land use divides. So my shout out to all of you is to say there's something that we need to talk about, and I'm sure there's something that we could do together. So thank you very much. And I hope this is the start of a longer conversation.